Hi folks, welcome to Bear Mountain today. Today we're making JADAM Sulfur solution, which is a lower cost homemade, basically garden sulfur that is sprayable, that would be used as primarily as a fungicide and a prevention of things like mildews and other types of fungal diseases. But it's really an integral part of the whole JADAM natural pesticide system. And it's actually quite easy to make. It's made from essentially three things. The first is pure sulfur, something that's about 99% pure. And secondly, a high purity sodium hydroxide or lye. And then we use water. In this case, we're using filtered rainwater. You could use distilled water or softened water. I kind of tend to stay in that zone on things, basically because it's going to be mixed at many points with the JADAM wetting agent. So I want to make certain that what I use is going to be compatible and the best in terms of application on the plants. Basically, what we're trying to get to is that mixture with some sea salt, and sea salt is used as a way to provide some extra minerals, but at the same time help the process with less, what's the right term? I guess the right term is the sodium chloride in it is just an extra uh, to help the material become clearer with less sediment, suspended in the actual final product. So anyway, the mixture is actually quite simple. It's really important that we follow the steps in the order. You never want to add the sodium hydroxide or the sulfur to water. You want to add the water to the powdered goods. And so when we mix, we'll show you how we're going to put it together, but it's really important that we follow the order of it. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a slight heated or exothermic chemical reaction. And that heat that's generated by the lye mixing with the sulfur actually helps dissolve the sulfur into a liquid form. And this can be used then as part of the JADAM system. Usually, it's applied somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 500 dilution, that kind of level of things. So, but it really is kind of dependent on exactly what you're trying to go after and cure. So, anyway, let's start the process. I'll show you how I'm doing it out here. I'm doing it outside today in case there's any off gassing or anything like that. Just want to be sure that, I'm doing this in a well ventilated area. Okay. Normally I would probably make a 10-liter batch, but where I'm at right now, I'm going to make just a 5-liter batch. And what I've got my sulfur material here. Uh, I'm reusing a bag I used before, but this is 1.25 kilograms of sulfur. And then I've got approximately 1 kilogram of sodium hydroxide. Again, the sulfur is 99% pure, and the sodium hydroxide is I think it's like 98% pure. And then I have in this bag right here, what I've got is a mixture of, it's not dried apples, it's actually a mixture of sea salt and basalt rock and red clay powder. It totals up approximately 25 grams of clay, 25 grams of the basalt rock, and then we're looking at approximately um, 75 grams of sea salt. So these are all actually exact, and they've all been measured out. And then for water, I've got 2.5 kilograms or 2.5 liters. That's for the initial mixture for the heating. And then to finish off the final batch, I just put a cover over it so nothing drops in it. To finish off the final batch, I'm using 1.6 liters of filtered rainwater in both cases. So the idea here is we got to mix these things in order. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in the sulfur first, and we're going to throw on top of that the sodium hydroxide, and then the minerals. And then before we start the mixing, we're going to be sure to put on some safety equipment. I've got glasses here and a mask if I need it, but I'm outside, so I'm not pretty sure I need that. I'm also going to have a pair of gloves I'm wearing long pants, boots, and I've got a pair of gloves just in case. I don't want any of this stuff splashing on me, because what we're talking about is we're talking about heat that can get up to close to the boiling point of water. So we're talking about pretty hot. Um, the bucket we're using is a high density polyethylene, and this is not a reason I'm not using like a Homer bucket, which is the same. I think you can probably use a Homer bucket, but in this particular case, I'm using a heavier duty bucket. This is like 90 mil thick, so it in case there is any issues with the heat, this bucket is a little more rigid and sturdy. I also have a lid for it after we go through the initial heating process, add the additional water. Since in this case I'm adding a rock dust base to it, I need to let it sit for at least 24 hours to let any sediment that's in it after it's been, thoroughly mixed, settle down, and then I can decant off the actual pure liquid. So the whole idea here is we're going to have approximately 5 liters of finished sulfur spray. And then what we do with that is we'll store it in some quart jars, old quart canning jars with canning jar lids. And it should be shelf stable for uh, longer than I'll probably need to worry about getting it used up. So we're talking about something that could last several years. So let's get started with the mixing. Not going to do too much talking during the mixing, but I am going to take some temperature shots with my InstaRead thermometer to make sure I can actually see anything. Still kind of dark. Well, we'll see what we can do. If you can't read it, I'll definitely tell you what it is. Right now, outside, the ambient temperature is about 60 degrees, so we're in pretty good shape. Okay, let's get started mixing things up. All right, so what we're going to do here is I got my safety equipment on, and we're going to start with putting the sulfur in first. So we can see the sulfur, and going to do this slowly in a way that we don't, create any dust. You got to be careful with this stuff. And so I'm just going to put that in there. Make sure I get it all out of the bag. Trying to avoid making certain that I don't create any undue dust or anything like that. And then we're going to add the sodium hydroxide. I put this plywood down just in case there's some kind of overflow or something goes bad. And we also have extra water around on the just in case. I want to make certain that's all in there. So far, no dust. That's pretty good. The last dry ingredient I'm going to put in is the salt and the amount of the rock dust already pre-mixed. All right, that's all the dry ingredients. Now, I've got a mixing stick. This is an old closet hole, you put your hangers on, and I'll be using that to mix it up. The first step now is we're going to add all of the initial water for mixing. We add this all at once, and it's real important that you keep these ratios correct. So we're going to put this in nice and slow, not to make any kind of splashing. And we'll just start with the initial. Okay, so the water's in there. It's already starting to bubble. We're going to do a check on the temperature. It's already 107. So it's already starting to move. And we're going to just start stirring this. With the whole idea is you want to use a manual stick to be able to do this starting out. Now it's kind of got a yellow color to it right now, but when it gets finished, it's going to be close to kind of an amber color. So it'll darken as it goes. Try not to get any extra stuff splashed up on the sides of the bucket. I can already kind of feel it changing already. And you just basically go until everything is dissolved. And right now it still feels pretty crunchy, so there's still a lot of stuff in there. And then you can kind of start seeing there's some steam boiling off of this. So just doing another temperature check. It's already 181. So that's 181 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's still going. I want to mix this continuously. So it shouldn't go too much above boiling, hopefully. It's already turning a nice dark color. This whole process from start to finish, I want to make sure I'm out of any kind of fragrances that are drifting off here. And it's already turning a nice dark color, starting to turn. And I'm just going to keep going and manually stirring this until I don't feel it kind of being crunchy anymore. I'm not trying to, do it super fast. I just want to make sure everything is dissolved. Now we're just a couple of minutes into the process. We'll see what the temperature is at this point. 195. So it hasn't peaked yet. It's still going. So it's amazing. You just put these three things together and you end up with, this kind of temperature. And the sulfur is pretty much melted, at least I can see at this point. It does give off a bit of an odor. Kind of almost weirdly smells kind of like what you'd say would be a tire melting or something, It's kind of like that burning rubber smell. Not burning plastic per se. It's just kind of a slight sulfur fragrance to it. Still going here. Still feel the crunchy stuff in the bottom. Okay, one more temperature check. 192. So it's kind of peaked. It's coming down a bit, starting to come down. I want to make sure this stuff is all really well melted in before I add the last water to it. Okay, do another temperature check on it. 194. So it's still got some heat in it. All right, so I've been stirring it now it's been a little over 10 minutes that I've kind of been working on this. And the overall temperature now has dropped to 177. So I think at this point, I'll stir it now with the remaining water in it because it's definitely hit its peak. It's almost 20 degrees off its peak. And it feels like everything is dissolved. That's really the key, if everything is dissolved. In this case, it is. So what we're going to do is now add the final water. This is 1.6 liters. Which will get us up to our full 5 liters. That water was probably 65, 70 degrees. And that lowered the temperature down to 138. So it's still pretty warm, but everything is melted, so I feel pretty good about that. And it's just a matter now of, I think, just stirring it a little more. And when the temperature gets closer to about 100, what I'm going to do at that point is kind of cover the bucket and let it sit. So let any sediment that's suspended in in the solution to kind of settle out. And then what we should be left with is a pretty clear solution. Now, my understanding is, some people say, well, you don't need to add when you added the salt in, you didn't need to put in rocks or rock dust or clay powder or anything like that. The purpose of that really is just as a mineral boost, because the bulk of that rock dust and clay, the heavy particles will settle out as sediment, but there'll be some very fine materials that'll be suspended in the solution with the sulfur, and those are actually a benefit to the plant. Think of it as kind of like a micronutrients in a sense, and so there is a benefit to it. Now, you don't have to make the JADAM sulfur with the rock dust. So if you don't have access to rock dust, if you're using sea salt, you could use Redmond's, you could use the Himalayan sea salt, or just a good relatively sea salt that hasn't been processed. It still has a lot of minerals in it. That will work fine too. Now, one of the things about using the rock dust is you do have to let it settle for a while for those heavier particles to settle out as a sediment. But when you're not using that and you're just using the salt, you don't have to. And basically, once it gets cool enough, what you could do is you could then decant it off into your containers, and it'd be ready to go. So let's check back in a few more minutes. I'll just keep stirring for a few more minutes. I'm going to give it about a total of 20 minutes. I think by that point it should be totally done. Okay, so the mixing is finished. Check the temp here. It's down to 128, 129, right in that zone. So it's dropping pretty fast. You can use, after you add the second amount of water in it, just to kind of speed things along a little bit, you can use like a drill with a paint mixer on it. That'll work just fine. But definitely when you're starting in the beginning, when you're trying to slowly mix the stuff, you definitely want to stay with a manual, like a wood stick of your own. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and just take a little sample out of this. It's not going to look totally clear, but it should give you an idea what it looks like. I'm just going to take just a little bit, a little more maybe. And so what we've got is, it's a little bit cloudy. It's definitely mixed. And so as it settles out, it's going to get an even more amber color to it. This stuff will stain, so you got to be careful with it. At this point, I want to make certain that I'm going to just put a cover on it loosely so it can still get a little air into it. Let the moisture out so I don't get excess condensation on it. And just let it sit for a couple hours, and then put the lid down and seal it off from any further oxygen until tomorrow morning, and then we'll be able to decant it. And you can kind of see what it looks like. It's definitely got that yellow sulfur look to it, and it smells like sulfur. So I think we've got a easy product to make here. Now, one of the questions that people might ask is, well, why would you do this? You can just buy lime sulfur spray or something like that for, maybe $15, $20 a quart, depending on what things cost nowadays. The cost of doing this on your own, besides exactly what's in it, is a little less than $3 a liter, which I guess is, when you say it's a quart, it's probably somewhere right around $3 a quart. Let's just say, for argument's sake, about pretty close to 3 days. It was like $2.86 per liter. So I guess if you translate it into a quart, it's somewhere right around $3. So it's cheaper still to do it yourself than to buy it. You're going to be using this at a pretty diluted rate, so a little will go a long ways. And again, but the major thing about this is it works well with the wetting agent, and that it also doesn't have any other things in it that you may not want to be applying. So I guess that's the major reason why I'm doing it this way instead of just going out and buying lime sulfur. So that's it for the first step. The mixing part's actually pretty easy. We're just going to let it sit now for 24 hours. As the temperature comes down, I'll check it again. Like I said, when it gets down to closer what ambient temperature is, I'll make certain that I just put the lid on to exclude air, because if you leave this open to the air for a prolonged period of time, you'll start getting some crystallization forming on the top. So I'll come back in a few hours and make sure everything is okay after it gets closer to ambient temperature. And what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to cover this for overnight. So I'm going to get it into a shelter location, like bring it into the garage or something, and just let it set for at least 12 hours to 24 hours, sometime in that time zone, and then I'll be able to decant off a more pure liquid. There'll be some sediment left at the bottom, and what you can do if it's mixed with some liquid is we'll filter it before we put it into our jars anyway, to make certain there isn't any solids in it. And so it'll end up basically, we're going to end up with about 5 quart jars, maybe a little less, of finished liquid here of the sulfur. And any of the solids that are left over, we'll just spread around the garden as basically a soil amendment. It's basically rock dust and sulfur, if there's any left in it. Primarily, it's going to be rock dust. So it should be good for the garden. Or if you don't want to put it in your garden, you could put it into a compost pile, an active compost pile. That'd be fine to work out too. All right, so we let the sulfur solution sit for about 24 hours, and that what it looks like is the solids have settled down. You can kind of see them down to the bottom, and what's left is a pretty pure solution. I'm going to dip this out of here and fill these quart jars, is what I'm going to be using for storage. And when I bought them, they had some lids on it, so we could easily do a seal on it. It's important that when you store the material that you fill up the jar and don't leave too much headspace to try to keep the oxygen out. And so I'm going to fill within probably about a ½ inch to the top, or somewhere right around there. And I should be able to get, I'd say somewhere around at least 3 good quart jars, probably 4, and then a portion of another one that will be have sediments and things like that. I'm using a paint filter on my funnel to catch any sediments, because what I want to be able to use when I get things in the sprayers, I don't want to have any sediment in the sprayer itself. So basically, at this point, you just kind of be careful about not disturbing the sediments on the bottom, and try not to make a mess. Try to be as close to possible as I can to make certain that everything is good to go. And it seems like it's all that solid stuff settled out pretty good. There's a little bit of sediment left in my scooper, but it's not too bad. So I kind of want to show you guys here, once I get this jar filled up, what it looks like, and then I'll show you the completed process, because you guys don't need to sit here and watch me fill jars. If there is any sediment floating, the filter is catching it. So, because again, most of the sediments are, like I said, are the sediments for the more coarse materials of the rock dust and the clay that was added to it. The micro, really fine powders are, see, I'm just about full here, so I think that's about it. And this stuff will stain, so when you do this, you gotta, I'm using cardboard that I can recycle, and so that I don't end up, with a mess. But this is basically it. It's a nice, beautiful amber color. and that's about a quart. So I'll just make, I guess I'm leaving closer to an inch of headspace, which is fine, somewhere between an inch and a half inch. And that's it. I'm just going to label it for what it is, and that material is good to use. So that's it. That's the process. All right, so we got it all decanted out. Now, one of the things, this is really going to be hard to show on the film, but the material that's taken from the top has a very almost amber clear look to it, and it's a little difficult to tell from, particularly as you get reflection and everything like that, but you got to take my word for it. But the last container, which was the fifth one, has a bit of, even though it doesn't really have particles in it that you would say are sediment that would probably clog things up. This is the last one you want to use, or what's going to basically have to happen is this is going to have to sit for probably a period of time. So like these first four right here that were decanted with no sediment and suspended in the solution are good to go. So these we can use right away. This one's going to sit for whatever period of time to get more of a sediment down at the bottom. And then before we use it, we can just decant off the top. But got a gallon of good material here. And when you go and you look and say, well, what does it cost, per liter? And it's roughly about, like I said, by the time I'm just going to round this up, it's going to be about $3 a liter, or in a sense, for a gallon, we're talking about somewhere around $11.50 a gallon of this material. Now, when you're buying a quart of lime sulfur, you're going to see prices. It could be anywhere from 15 to 20 something dollars a quart. And basically what you're getting this stuff for is a substantially less. And that what's in this is actually a higher level of sulfur in the solution than probably lime sulfur. Plus it doesn't have the other things that a commercial lime sulfur would have. So specifically what's in here is just basically minerals, sulfur being the number one, and then some suspended, very micronized small particles of from sea salt and rock dust. So this is basically the finished solution. This gallon here, plus whatever I recover out of that last quart, is probably going to last me the season. And again, it only cost about $11.50 to make a gallon of this stuff. So it's definitely worth the time. And this is it's a powerful fungicide. It's usable with wetting agent. It's usable in many of the formulas in the JADAM natural pesticide handbook. And so I think, this is a pretty good value for the time invested. Anyway, that's all. This can store for a long time. Just got to keep it I'm just going to store it in a relatively cool, like garage, or in my case, it's going to be kind of a storage room that stays around 60 to 70 degrees in there tops and never freezes during the winter. So that's it. You just want to keep it away from freezing and away from direct sun and away from boiling in the summertime. And other than that, there's nothing live in it, so you don't have to worry about not using a solid top. It's all minerals basically suspended in solution. So that's it, folks. That's all there is to making JADAM sulfur. And the first thing that we're going to be using it on is, I have some peach leaf curl on one of my peach trees, and so I'm going to be mixing up a batch of that in the next day or so, as weather permits, and get out there and kind of give it a fungicidal treatment. This is really good for fruit trees. It's good for vegetables. It's good for taking out powdery mildew. It takes out a whole lot of different things that it's effective on. One of the things, though, you got to be careful with, like with any sulfur, liquid sulfur compound, is yellow, and it will stain yellow on any porous surface. So when you're dealing with it, you want to kind of think about glass, or you want to think about stainless steel. And if you don't want your fingers getting stained, like I got some yellow on there, it'll wear off after a while. It doesn't hurt you. But, wear gloves. And if you're using fine sprays and mists and things like that, it's not that it's going to hurt you, but you definitely want to have something that kind of protects your breathing and protects your eyes. It's the same thing as if you're spraying with anything. So that's it, folks. Thanks for watching today. We'll catch you on the next video. You stay safe out there. Bye-bye.